right, let's get into our next segment. And this is going to be a little bit of a fun one. And that is what makes for a good logistics podcast. Blythe Milligan here with Grace Sharkey. This is Everything is Logistics. We are proudly presented by SPI Logistics. And this was inspired by a conversation. Fellow podcaster Andrew Silver posted up on LinkedIn. I believe it was last week. Kind of, if I'm going to paraphrase what he said, is basically companies that are starting a podcast, maybe putting a lot of money behind it. Are they essentially going to stick with it, or is this just extra money that these companies have kind of lying around, and they're bored and they want to start a podcast? That's basically kind of the gist of it. Do you think I described that
right.
correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
totally.
So that's sort of the summary of the conversation, and it was a lively debate going on in the comments, which yours truly did participate as a fellow logistics podcaster. But let me think how I want to start this conversation, because you very experienced over at FreightWaves with hosting several different shows. I think you are on the verge of creating one in-house with Orderful. Is that accurate?
Yeah, we have I think 3 episodes out right now technically, and 2 more recorded that'll be coming out over the next couple weeks. They come out basically like around bi-weekly. We try to do a couple a month. And ours focuses a little bit more on like we talked about earlier, like our partners, those like consultants that we work with, or even customers. The next actually 2 episodes will be actual customers that we're doing the EDI for directly. It's funny because I definitely wouldn't say they generate a ton of like pipeline, like leads to bring back. There are certain ways I think that we're putting it out there that I'll adjust to kind of bring those in a little bit more. But we almost use them more as like kind of collateral for other posts, clips, etc. And also just to even like include on our YouTube page to kind of bring in maybe a little bit more of like search engine SEO type of stuff as well.
Yeah, I think that it's important to note from 2 different lenses, because in Silver's post, he was talking about it as both a company owner or former company owner, but now he's doing a podcast as, kind of like exploring like his own curiosity. And I think that is what makes for the best host, because if you have a podcast host that is genuinely curious in the topic that they're talking to other people about, or they're just overall talking about, it's a much different conversation than maybe the company internal approach when you're starting a show. So I think when you're starting an internal show, you kind of hit the nail on the head that you're not going to launch an episode and like sit back and like wait for all of the leads to come, because frankly, they're probably not going to come from a single conversation. There is no straight line from listener to customer in the podcast world. It's all over the place. As a listener, you want to listen to several different conversations with both subject matter experts and then also from different customers or just interesting stories. And so if you are going to do a podcast, whether you work internally or maybe you're doing it from a marketing lens, or maybe you want to do it as a hobby, there's all different kinds of sort of like the ROI to think about. And I think that you're coming at it from the smart approach, where some other companies might not have, I guess, that focused goal of why are we even doing a show? Because some of these shows, especially in logistics that have popped up, it just looks like maybe you have some extra spare time and a podcast is fun and a podcast looks cool. So why not spend a lot of time and energy on creating it in-house? But then in a few months, when you have to justify that budget or that time that's being spent on that, how are you going to communicate the value? And so I'm curious, from like an internal company lens, how are you communicating the value of starting an internal podcast? Like, why is this a valuable thing that you need to spend your time doing?
It's interesting too, because I think when I first started, it was like something that leadership wanted to like dive right away on. And I actually was like, let's think about like first like how we want to attack this, right? Because I think even just making episodes to make episodes is totally off base. And
Short-sighted.
yeah, and it's tough because I think when people hear the word podcast too, they automatically are like they expect a certain um uh calendar with that, right? So like, hey, podcasts, I expect to, as a listener, you should have a new episode every week, and I expect that from you. And so it's interesting, like even though technically like we call it a podcast, like theoretically we use it as just opportunities to make some quality conversational content that we can share with our customers, etc. And so I think that's what's interesting to me with the whole I do think that we're in this like podcast fever right now where people want to make these with like high level individuals, but again aren't thinking totally through like how, well, one, the amount of money that you're putting into it, right, I think changes the conversation. Whereas like maybe a couple $100 an episode is something that we're looking at more here. I think there's others that are very clearly spending big bucks on cameras, multiple camera angles, which I think is crazy for a podcast. I mean, I know celebrities that have max 2 cameras, but have the sponsors to do that. That's another thing too, is like, understanding your sponsor, like if there's an opportunity to have sponsors, right, for
Well, what's the
episodes.
ROI? Like,
Yeah,
that's what you have to ask yourself before you even
yeah,
start and your ROI may look different. It may change. Now, I remember when I first started, my ROI was, "Ooh, imagine if I could get a Jaguars player on the show." Like, that
yeah,
was my ROI. Or then it evolved into, okay, well, starting the Digital Dispatch podcast, which is what this turned into, with everything as logistics. It's I can talk to my customers and I can gain a deeper understanding of the struggles that they're going through, and I can talk to my prospects to
yes,
understand what is driving them to make certain buying decisions. And
yeah,
so it shifts, and now it's more sponsor focused, but it's only sponsors that make the most sense for my brand. Like
yes, totally.
I remember one time there was this company that reached out and they sell dolls for truckers. So you can imagine what kind of
Yeah,
dolls these are.
yes,
That is not a good brand fit for me. Like,
yeah,
if they were
exactly.
gonna throw a lot of cash at me in order to promote this product, I'm not gonna do that. And so as a podcast host, you kinda have to weigh the pros and cons of the companies you're going to work with, because they could be promoting something or doing things on the side that could make some or create some brand
Yes,
damage for you, even if you have nothing to do with it. But then being affiliated with you, you're also affiliated with whatever negative or positive connotation that that company is part of. And
yeah,
even with some like sponsorship deals that I've done, where we have the subject matter experts on the show, but what is so impactful is when they allow their customers, or SPI is a great example, where they allow their freight agents to come on and talk about their experience.
yes,
And that those shows get significantly more user or listener engagement
mhm,
than a subject matter expert. And so what my kind of theory is that visitors and listeners are entering through those customer conversations where the customers are giving that firsthand knowledge, but then they go back and they want to listen to the leadership. And so that's what kind of the loose funnel looks like, on how I'm interpreting it and how I'm seeing it in my own data. And so that your ROI can evolve and it can change. But if you're just starting off with like, hey, I got an extra 100 grand to spend on a podcast, I think we're going to start it internally and get 17 different camera angles and expensive graphics and video, like all of that stuff is, it's important. It's a nice to have. But if you don't have a dynamic host that is part of your company, strategically part of your company, because I have seen too where someone will become the face of that company and then they leave and they take all of
totally.
that awareness with them. So that's
Yes.
another thing to be concerned about as well.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting, like talking about what you're speaking on, I think is huge is too. I mean, there's one that I think, where I can't speak for Andrew, but one in particular, I think he was pointing out where The concern I have with some of them is like, um, how how is your customer learning about your product through all this? Is your hope that like you just get a high level individual and then they say, "Oh, while I'm sitting here listening, I wonder what this company does." Like, talk kind of to like full circle back to what you were talking in the beginning, like you could get 130 leads and then only find 3 are actual customers. And I think where you're shooting yourself in the foot in that respect is how many of those watchers now are just watching because of this high level individual that you brought on that has actually absolutely nothing to do with your product. And that's where I find it interesting. And it's like, especially if you're dumping a lot of money into it, you're not talking about your product at all. You're not posting it where you would meet the people who would be interested in your product. Um, then, you know, how are you finding decision makers? What are your buying triggers, and how do you like get this rolling without any just base? I mean, it feels like it's just it's for clout,
Yeah,
right?
it's like a vanity. It almost feels like a vanity project where you're not having the business goals in mind. And so I think
Totally.
that that's sort of the thing I wanted to lean on with this discussion is, especially as companies are considering their marketing budgets for 2026 and beyond, should you start a podcast? Well, I think you should always be talking to your customers.
Yeah.
And if they're willing to come on camera and talk about their buying experience with you, I would maybe consider asking them to go on somebody else's show. Because I
Yeah.
do think that there is a little bit of a, well, the customer's only going on the show because you asked them to go. And then are they going to sort of shelter their opinion or what they really think because they're on that particular company's podcast? And so there may be sort of that perception, even though you try really hard from a company lens to have it, come directly from and not sort of mince words about what the customer is saying. But to your point, you can absolutely use those as like short clips, testimonials. Your sales team can use those to answer common questions, especially like FAQs. And this is exactly what this customer did in order to, sell this a little bit more. And so they can use that clip in order to, send it in an email or send it in a presentation. And so
Yes.
it just removes that, like, I think, barrier of awkwardness or maybe barrier of information, and makes it presentable in a way that it feels less intimidating to do the discovery process of what potential problem am I experiencing? And then does this company solve it? And you can answer those questions with the content you're creating. And so I
Yes.
think I would just caution other logistics companies out there that yes, it does feel like everybody has a podcast, but the overwhelming reality is that more than 90% of all podcasts never make it past 10 episodes. So
Yeah.
you might hear about a lot of different podcasts, but the overwhelming majority of them are not going to make it past 10 episodes. And so if you want to start one internally or support another podcaster that's already doing it, then that's your own prerogative. But I would think about it from the lens of, what is my audience actually going to care about when it comes to these conversations? And
Yeah.
that's where you make the content. That's the kind of content you should be reverse engineering from there, with the nice graphics, with the great copy, and one or two camera angles, and things like that, where this can be very expensive to
Yeah.
undertake. And then when you only get 25 plays on an episode, those marketing managers are going to have to be answering that question of, why did we just spend $100,000 on this podcast and we only
Totally.
are getting 50 downloads? And then you're
Yeah.
going to be probably put into a situation, not calling anybody out, but you're going to be put into a situation where you have to buy views, you have to buy downloads. Those are very easy and very cheap to do.
Yeah.
And there are definitely some companies out there that are using that. I don't. All of my numbers are AIB certified. That's International Association of Broadcasters. I think that's the acronym. But yeah, I don't do that on my end. But I can tell you, there's only a select amount of clips and shows that get a high listener base. But that's
Yeah.
because the audience that we're talking to, logistics is not mainstream. Supply chain is not necessarily mainstream. And so you have to make content that can go deep, but also appealed to the different silos that exist within this industry. Because even though you work in logistics, working at a trucking company, I had no idea how the warehousing process worked. I had no idea how the maritime process worked until I started talking to these people. And
Totally.
so you have to understand it from your audience's lens too, that they might not know all this lingo and this industry jargon, or who these, influencers that you're having on. You have to be really conscious about why you're starting the show, and then
Yeah.
reverse engineer of what your customers care about. Because then your ROI can evolve from there.
And I think there's a few out there where I've honestly said to myself, and I kind of understand where they're coming from, where I've said to myself, why isn't that person just sponsoring a more popular podcast, right? And I think what they do is they see the bill and they think, oh, I could just make this myself,
Mhm.
but not understanding the audience reach that those individuals have made, the work that goes into it. And I think just the upside of just a sponsoring a podcast that's doing success by itself. I also, and again, I'm not Andrew Silver, not trying to speak for him on this, but I think maybe they see what Andrew's done and think, oh, like we should hop on that ride too. Understand Andrew, and he's talked about this numerous times on his LinkedIn. Like, part of this is because I think what he can even contractually do right now in his career.
Hmm.
So like when he can start getting back out there and doing things outside of, I think, just what he's allowed to do right now with Molo, um will he keep doing it? We don't know. And so again, not speaking for him, but there, like, he is doing this because he has free time in his life to do this, and it's a way for him to keep, building his network. And like there's actual reasoning behind someone like Andrew doing this that is helpful and fruitful for him. I think
Yeah.
what happens is people say, oh, I could be like Andrew Silver if I start a podcast, not realizing like, no, every situation is different. And he's not just doing it for clout, like at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think too, he comes at it from a deeply curious lens,
Yes.
to
Yeah.
where he wants to understand. He has long form conversations with these people. And so you can tell in the work, you can always tell creatively in the work if somebody cares about what they're doing, whether it's what they're writing about or what they're posting about. You can tell if they care.
Yeah.
And I hope that comes across in my content. I know it definitely comes across in yours and also Andrew Silver's. There's, definitely a ton of other podcasters. Chris Jolly is one that
Yeah.
he genuinely enjoys
That's his
what he's
business
doing.
though. Like, like that.
Well, it helps his
And I
business
and I
now.
will say it's been again, I'm doing one too, but that's not our business. But like, uh if someone is doing a podcast at an A+ level of work, my second question is, why is that A+ level of work going to your product? Do you know what I mean? Are you a podcast company or are you an AI company? And so
Yeah.
that's like, again, the amount of investment I see in some of these, I'm like, boy, your users better be thrilled with whatever you're delivering.
Especially from like if you launch a show and you don't have customers,
Yes.
you're not
Wild.
spending that budget on deeply understanding your customers.
Yeah.
It's going to get chopped.
Yeah.
Plain as day. It's
As
going to
as the kids say, it's chopped already. It's
Yeah.
chopped.
It's
It's
not making
chopped.
it to the 2027
Yeah.
budget. Let's just put it that way. So I think that is let's leave it here for especially in the age of AI. Like, we are going to frankly just see more podcasts.
Yes.
We're going to see more podcasts in this industry. Your quality, even if you genuinely love what you do, it's probably going to have to improve. Where before, I would say my strategy was
Actually,
more like
can I add one
quantity.
thing?
Yeah.
I've noticed this trend on Instagram, and I'm wondering if you've experienced too. And if you're going to do a podcast, do this. Have you found recently the fake commercials that are podcasts
I
that
have
you know what I'm talking about?
where
See,
they're
I
just
would,
they set it up in an
yes,
environment like this.
yes. And it feels like like that's, if you're gonna do fancy camera work, do that.
Yeah.
Make the fake ads that make it feel like a podcast. Don't just have Paul from Free Caviar on to taste caviar because you're bored. Like, whoops. Okay, I said it. But like, they know. They call me out on it on LinkedIn. But like, that's like what's funny to me is like, if you're going to do that, then do it the AI fake way that people are doing that get people to sit on it a few minutes more. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, I'm just seeing an ad. Like, that's going to have a better ROI than being like, let's have caviar. Like,
Well, I think too, you're kind of hinting around the fact that, you know, I've seen Alvis recently did a
yeah,
podcast or started their own internal podcast, which Ava, love her. She's now with a new
yeah,
company, but she was hosting that show, and the clips from those conversations are then being used as ads. So they
yes,
interviewed their customers, and
yes,
then they took like the dynamic clips from those
yes,
conversations and then they use them as advertising. And so
exactly.
that to me is like the perfect blueprint to follow if you're thinking about implementing a podcast strategy into your marketing budget for 2026 and beyond is like follow the blueprints of the companies that they're not going to throw $100,000 behind a show,
Yeah,
but maybe you throw $10,000 behind a show and
exactly.
you pick up or I've also said this for years. Find local media talent because local media talent knows how to do all of the things
Yeah,
that you need to get done for a podcast. And they know how to speak to it from an editorial lens. They know how to edit. They know how to distribute it. They know how to conduct the interview. And so you're covering a lot of those costs into one person. And then
exactly.
from there, you could put an advertising, but you can promote the show first organically, promote the clips organically, see what resonates with people, see what resonates with your customers, send it to your customers and get feedback as well. And then
Exactly.
from there, you can figure out where to put the money behind the podcast clips to generate more awareness about your brand and about your company, and do it in a very cost effective way that still moves the needle from an ROI perspective. Because there's I don't want to say like the podcast market is too crowded, but our attention spans are shorter.
Totally.
Our attention is limited to only a few hours in the day. So if you want to be one of those shows that somebody listens to, that they have that valuable time frame and
Mhm.
listening in on the way to work, on the way home, you have to think about how to respect their time and
Totally.
respect your customers' time first, and you'll see much more benefits from that down the line. You'll get a renewed budget, and this is all
Mhm.
free advice. So take it and run with it. And then from there, if you have a successful product or a successful show that is the product, then you can start to branch out into more, the fun interviews and, talking to
Exactly.
maybe, some of the bigger personalities in the industry that have a more wider appeal. But first, just start with your customers,
Yeah,
understand your customers first, and then work from there.
totally. Love it.